This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
And I don't think, frankly, public money should be used to support some people basically establishing their superiority over other people.
Welcome to She Wasn't Born Yesterday, the pod that fearlessly chats about all things affecting us ladies who are 40 plus fabulous.
Well, and the guys that want to know what we think.
Well, them too. I'm Janet Evans, advertising creative.
And I'm Jenny Woodhouse, semi-retired social worker.
In other words, you're busier than ever. We're J&J and we're super thrilled you're with us for She Wasn't Born Yesterday. Jen and I would like to extend a massive thank you to all the teachers in Australia.
Oh, here.
And we think you do an absolutely fantastic job.
Yes.
And we really, really appreciate you educating our new generation. And we also want to thank a lot of people in our She Wasn't Born Yesterday Facebook group who contacted us about their takes on public versus private education, many of whom we discovered are, in fact, teachers. And we really, really enjoyed your insights. It was an absolute eye-opener. Some of your observations were incredible, and we'll get to some of them later. So if your kids, if you're listening to this, if your kids or grandkids are at school, we wonder how you chose where to send them. It's an interesting question.
It is.
But today we're chatting to a very outspoken advocate for public education. She's a Walkley Award-winning author, has written 2 best-selling novels, and when she's not doing all of that, she's a broadcaster, documentary maker, and frequent guest on the Gruen Transfer. Jane Caro AM. Welcome to She Wasn't Born Yesterday.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Welcome, Jane. Thank you for being with us.
Awesome. I just don't know where you squeezed us in, but anyway, we're very grateful. But gorgeous, to kick off, let's start with the elephant in the classroom, government funding. I was a bit shocked to read that over half of private schools in Australia receive, in fact, more funding per student than comparable public schools, and the funding gap per student is as much as over $7,000 a year for the students. How is this possible and why?
It seems to be the Australian way to give lots of public money to those who don't need it and be as niggardly as possible towards those who really do. It's bizarre. I mean, it's the same way as Richard Dennis from the Australian Institute makes that fantastic point about how in Australia we tax university students for their degrees more than we tax the fossil fuel industry. So I would say it's following that pattern, wouldn't you?
So we're good at it.
For the wealthy.
Yes.
And it's also happened over a long period of time, basically from a perspective of a neoliberal view of the world. So basically in Australia, we have a kind of voucher-like funding system, and vouchers are beloved of the neoliberals. It comes from this idea that parents should choose whatever school they like and the government will fund their choice. The trouble is, though, that they leave the schools as private schools, and so those private schools can insist that parents add money to the voucher. Because, of course, when you charge fees, it's a sorting mechanism. It's a really good way to keep the riffraff out, the hard to teach, the expensive to teach children. So private schools don't want to give up charging fees because otherwise they wouldn't be private anymore. They'd just be another kind of public school, and that's not their point. So the trouble with vouchers is what it does is it increases the inequality between those children whose parents either can't or won't add money to the voucher and those parents who either can or will. And it's no good condemning parents. It's no good saying, oh, well, I make sacrifices. Who cares? It's not about you and your education. It's about children. And no child is disadvantaged through any of their own doing. Some of us are lucky in the lottery of birth. We're card-carrying members of this lucky sperm club. Others of us are not. And it's not our fault or to our credit either way. And so by deciding that we will tie funding to parental background, so basically successive, mostly conservative, so-called liberal governments have used education funding to reward the parents they approve of and punish the parents they don't approve of. And because they have a neoliberal view of the world, which is basically that anyone who gets ahead deserves to, and anyone who struggles deserves to as well, that has led to them using education funding and our schooling system over the last 25, even longer than that, but let's just keep it to the last 25 years, to create a class system. So most countries use their education funding to actually close the gaps between children who are born fortunate and children who aren't born fortunate. But in Australia, we use our education funding to turbocharge those gaps. And that is why we have ended up with one of the most segregated education systems in the developed world. And that segregation, that concentration of disadvantaged students in disadvantaged schools and advantaged students in advantaged schools is increasing at the second fastest rate in the OECD. So we are amongst the very worst in the world for funding education according to need. We don't do it. And people rationalise it in all sorts of ways. If you think about education, you can divide it up really. What do we have public or any kind of education system for? Well, education is really for three things. It's a public good. So we know from research that societies that have a well-educated population are more prosperous, they're more equal, they do better in the world, and their populations tend to be healthier and happier and more productive. There's research to prove all of that. So public education is a public good because the entire community benefits from having a well-educated general population. That is to all our benefits. But schooling and education is also a private good because you gain the skills that enables you to, get ahead in the world. You have to be able to read and write. You have to be able to add up. You have to be able to do things like that to have any hope, really, of getting ahead economically or even just getting a point of entry. So it's a private good for everyone from that perspective. But the private schools drive that idea of private good into a kind of competitive private good so that it's about my kid doing better than other kids. I have to make sure that my child has more advantages than other kids. And the problem with that is that if you do that privately, fund that with entirely your own money, I don't have much argument with you. That's entirely up to you. But when you start asking for public funding, for public money to fund your desire to make sure your kid does better than someone else's kid, particularly someone else's kid who's already been born with more barriers in their way than your kid has in the first place, then I start to say, is that really what education funding should be doing? And then we move into the idea of education and schooling as a positional good, where it becomes about your position in society. So it's about status and it's about, whether you're a superior sort of a person or an inferior sort of a person. And we have really seen that develop in the kind of stigma we now attach to public education and the ridiculous kind of lauding of these palaces of privilege that we call private schools, which are publicly funded, actually. They're only private in terms of access. They're not private in terms of funding. And that is very much, you see parents, I've seen it, a sticker on the back of somebody's four-wheel drive, I'm a Riverview mum. That's a positional good. And I don't think, frankly, that public money should be used to support some people basically establishing their superiority over other people.
I have to admit, when I read that, it was from the Australian Education Union recently, it also concluded, without urgent action, public schools will continue to be grossly underfunded by about $30 billion over the next 5 years. And I actually didn't know that
private schools receive
more than public schools. If you're paying all those fees, why do they need the extra money?
It's not about need. It's about want.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Our education system couldn't care about need.
Yeah.
Part of the question too is this across the board on the political spectrum? So whether you're Labor, Liberal, whatever, somewhere in between, Is it all governments that do this, or is
Pretty
it
much. The Greens are the only party that absolutely come out all guns blazing in support of public education. Unfortunately, the way that Australia's developed historically, basically we have the Liberal Party, which certainly in the past, less so now, represented the Protestant side of, and the Labor Party very much about the Catholic settlers to this country. And so for a long time, we've had that divide also in schools, and therefore the Labor Party is often very, very nervous about doing anything that will upset the private schools and the Catholic schools in particular, because the largest private school sector is the Catholic school sector. And please don't tell me they're not private schools. Yes, they are. They can open schools, close schools where they want to. They can carry no responsibility for the compulsory education of all students. They can pick and choose who they enrol, and they charge fees. So, sorry, they are private schools. The fees they charge might be slight in some cases, not in others, than the fees charged by the so-called exclusive or elite schools. I prefer exclusive because what they're doing is excluding. But in the private system, Catholics are the biggest group and they are another system, and they control education in Australia. So what the Catholic education system wants, the Catholic education system gets. The public system is very rapidly becoming a residualised system of welfare support for the poor, which is really, really, really disastrous and completely unfair. And it is, I mean, Catholic schools really, I know what the figures are. The public system educates the vast majority of students with any kind of designated disadvantage. So the poorest. They, I think it's over 85, 90% of the poor attend public schools. Anyone with a disability, it's about 80%. Indigenous students, it's over 80%. From a non-English speaking background, it's about 80%. So anyone that has what is considered an educational disadvantage is much, much more likely to go to a public school than to either a Catholic, a Christian, or any kind of independent school. In fact, 30% of public schools are enrolling the most disadvantaged students. 30% of private schools are enrolling the most advantaged students. So it's really funny. It's a mirror image. It's 28.9%. Exactly the same statistic, but at the opposite ends of the socioeconomic.
Okay, there it is, right there.
It's interesting because, like, anecdotally, like when I was sending our son to school, people didn't seem to care too much about sending their kids to public primary schools. But when it came to the high school situation, suddenly everyone was obsessed with which private school, which school are you going to send the kid to?
I remember our son was in about year 3 when people started asking me, which school have you booked
enrolled
in?
in?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, yeah. I remember it well myself.
Yeah.
I know. My theory on that is that we become afraid of our teenagers. That when you look at a 5-year-old, you have a lot of hope for 5-year-olds. You know, they're lovely and sweet and biddable and all of that. And so public schools, everyone goes, oh, they'll be great in the public. You know, there's a sort of real sense of hope around it, and you're not afraid of other kids. You know, there are only other 5-year-olds after all when they start. But people are very afraid as a society. I think we're very uncomfortable with teenagers, and parents become very worried that their child will get in with the wrong crowd. Fascinated by the wrong crowd. Apparently they're all orphans. Nobody actually has a child who is the wrong crowd. They're just worried about their kid getting in with the wrong crowd, which is bizarre. So there, and this fear, you see, you would know, Janet, both you and I come from an advertising background, that there's really only 2 emotions that drive purchase decisions and choice of a school: hope and fear. Hope and fear. So the carrot and the stick, you know, you use it all the time, hope and fear. So basically public education, in fact, operates on hope, that we get all our kids together, we educate them, they get to know one another, we create a cohesive society, you know, we accept everyone regardless of who their parents are, what religious background they have, what colour their skin is, what ability they may or may not have. You know, we just say, yes, you're an Australian child, come and be in with us. It's a very hopeful view of the world. Unfortunately, over the last 25 years, and I think this has been driven by neoliberalism, we've seen it worldwide, people have become less and less hopeful and more fearful. Private schools, which are gated communities, let's be honest, a private school is a gated community. It has gates around it and it opens the gate for who it likes and closes the gate against who it does not. And when you're fearful and anxious, you like a gated community. It makes you feel protected. And when parents say things like, well, they get bits of discipline in private schools, which you'll often hear as the rationale, what they mean is private schools can expel or exclude any student they want to. Public schools find that much more difficult. They have to accept every kid that turns up. And if you're living in a society that, particularly with about teenagers, thinks that, you know, it's next door neighbour's teenager that's making your kid misbehave, then you're going to want a nicer class of kiddie, aren't you? And so you buy the private school, the gated community that you can best afford. There is no evidence that kids in private schools do better academically than kids in public schools once you adjust for socioeconomic background, which is the thing that has the biggest effect on how kids perform at school globally, right? Ownership of a school doesn't make any difference. It is parents' socioeconomic background. And what we've done in Australia, if we have corralled all the better off and wealthier, higher socioeconomic parents and their kids into private schools. So those schools appear to do better because they've creamed off the kids that are going to get better raw results. And we've concentrated all the kids who have not got that advantage, socioeconomic background, into public schools. And there's no evidence that corralling all the better off kids actually does anything particularly beneficial for the better off kids. But there's an awful lot of evidence that corralling all the worst off kids in the worst off schools has an incredibly detrimental effect.
So we're getting
them.
Right. We're getting a cycle effect, which is the more that happens, the worse behaviour problems happen in public schools. The more I don't want my child amongst those children with the behaviour problems, the more I want to put them in.
It's a vicious cycle. It's created a vicious cycle. This is done via public funding. This is having a terrible effect, not just on the kids who are at the bottom of the pile. The fact that the message they and their teachers get consistently is Australia doesn't give a shit about you. It doesn't give a shit about your future or anything because they are in crumbling schools that are falling down. Their classrooms are too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. And, you know, they call them public school kids, even those who go to, you know, public schools in middle class areas, refer to their schools as the POV schools or the POVO schools. That's the poverty schools. They're perfectly well aware that they're not getting the same resources behind their education as, you know, another kid down the road is getting. And so that sends a message, clear message to them and to the teachers who teach them and who work very, very hard with very few resources to try and overcome the inevitable, you know, the effects of poverty, which are real and measurable. Poverty creates stress. And stress creates cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And cortisol has a measurable effect on developing children's brains and on their ability to learn. So the more we concentrate the stress and the poverty and underfund, because Janet, you're right, every single public school in Australia, bar a handful in Canberra, is underfunded according to its agreed school resource standard, which is the amount of money each school needs to do its job adequately, not brilliantly, adequately. While every private school in Australia, bar a handful in the Northern Territory, is overfunded according to its school resource standard, and some of them are overfunded up to 200%.
Overfunded by public money?
Public and private, but yes, by public as well.
So, Jane, I mean, this is very, very black and white. I mean, obviously you are an advocate for public education. No,
I
just
wasn't
guessing.
picking that up. Yes.
I'm not quite sure, but
Yeah.
I'm giving you the facts, though.
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But
I'm not making this up.
no, but there must be some good things about private schools and some specific private schools for some specific kids. Because, for example, well, anecdotally again, our next door neighbour, their son went to public high school, didn't do very well. It was not good for him. He went to one of the more kind of militaristic type private schools and sharpened up within sort of 6 months to a year. I mean, that might have been his development as well, but it seemed to really suit his needs in terms of its structure, and as you were saying before, its discipline.
Wasn't he lucky?
Yeah.
Wasn't
very
he
much.
lucky
Yeah,
that
very
he got
much
that
so.
opportunity? Because
did get
a
that
lot of kids
Yeah.
don't have that opportunity.
No, that's
and
true.
we've got a system that makes sure that they don't.
Yeah.
So it's, yes, that's nice. Look, I'm not saying that every private school is lousy
Terrible.
at their job. They're not. I'm not saying that. But they are overfunded up the wazoo. And every time you send a child to a private school, you are taking opportunities away from a poor kid because of the funding that follows that enrolment.
And then
I'm sorry, but you are.
But then someone will say, but I'm talking about my child here.
Absolutely, I get it. You make the decision you make. It's not your fault that the system is as dishonest and as corrupted as it is, but then send your child to the private school and agitate to change the funding. Otherwise, shut up.
Actually, thank you. That's very, very helpful. So that was my next question. What can I do about it if I want to send my child to a private school?
Agitate. Because it's wrong. Your kid, if you've got choice, if you can afford, if they, and by the way, I've heard as many stories the other way where kids were miserable in a private school and got sent to a public school and suddenly came good. So the anecdotes just depend. It's not about the school. But if you're lucky enough to have choice, I had choice with my kids. I sent them to public schools, but I didn't have to. I could have afforded a private school. I didn't want to send them to a private school, so I made my choice. If you have choice, you are privileged. And your child, therefore, is automatically in a better position than a child whose parents have no choice. And whatever school that child goes to, they might be bullied, it might be awful for them, they might not blossom. They can't do anything about it because they haven't got the money to do anything about it. Now, that's a systemic issue. But if we want to have a decent education system where every child gets as good an opportunity as possible to not be in a school that doesn't suit them, then we have to do something about the way we fund schools. And the problem is that every time anyone suggests taking any funding from private schools, the parents get up in arms and it doesn't happen. So my sympathy for, my kid was in a hard position. Yes, I get it from a personal perspective, but that's a private good.
Yes.
What about the public good? And one of the things I really hate and I really get upset about, because sometimes it's genuine, and I've certainly had circumstances where I've seen people and their kids have been miserable in the school they're in, and they've had to, and if that had happened to my kids, I'd have done exactly the same thing as them. So I'm not condemning that decision from a personal family position. But what I hate is when someone moves their child from a public school to a private school because of all sorts of reasons, and it may not necessarily be that their child wasn't flourishing, or it may even have been their child was a bit of a problem and needed, there were other things that were going on. They might have been the wrong crowd.
The wrong crowd.
Yes.
Okay.
Hush, hush, whisper, death.
We won't tell.
But then they turn round and they pour absolute shit on the public school that they've left. They condemn it, they slag it off, they'll write posts on social media, they'll talk about it publicly and put it down. Now, the fact that a school wasn't great for your kid does not make it a bad school. And you've got to think about the degree of difficulty that those schools are dealing with. They don't have the money to do the job they're asked to do. We know that. It's in the actual figures on education. I'm not making these figures up. And so please, if you need to move your child or you decide to choose a private school, go right ahead. But could you restrain from slagging off the public system as a result. I was in a Pilates class, nice middle-class Pilates class
We won't
in
tell
Lane
anyone.
Cove. And, I'm shockingly middle class. I'm very privileged. And there was a woman there doing it, and she was joking that she and the instructor both had sons in Year 9, and we all know what, not just Year 9 boys, Year 9 girls as well. Year 9, there was a play that did the rounds called Year 9 Are Animals, and it was very successful.
Yes.
Yeah, you know.
Yes, we've heard that before.
It's a very difficult age. And they were laughing about it, and she said, oh, yeah, you know, I keep saying to my son, you know, he was at Riverview or one of these schools. And she said, I keep saying to him, you know, if he keeps behaving like this, I'll send him to Hunters Hill High.
No,
Okay.
Yeah.
no.
And I was lying there with a T-shirt on doing my Pilates, and the T-shirt said the Public Education Foundation. So it wasn't like I was hiding my line under a bushel. And I'm afraid I said, please, you send your kid wherever you like, but could you not use the local public school as a kind of dreadful warning?
Yes.
Because you are insulting all the parents who've chosen that school, all the teachers who work there, and all the students who attend it.
Well done. Thank you. So we can agitate.
Pilates.
We can send our child to a private school, but agitate. So
I
one way
prefer
to,
you didn't send them to a private school. I
but,
think
you know,
if the
just-
middle class returned to the public school system, that public school system would become much, much better for everyone, including the disadvantaged children that it teaches.
I
Because
totally agree, but you've got to do that en masse, don't you? Otherwise, you're sacrificing your own child as a single child, putting them into the like. That's how the argument goes.
you're not. I mean, I did.
I know
it.
you're not. I
sent
know
my-
you're not. Yeah,
And I didn't sacrifice them. And
yeah.
you know, I look now at my daughters who went to public schools, and people told me, no, these are middle-class public schools they went to because we live in a middle-class area, and people told me I was condemning my children to a lifestyle of prostitution and drug addiction.
They should be so lucky.
And by the way, my
That's what I
son's
said. What a disappointment that didn't happen, because that's highly profitable.
exactly. My sons did go to public schools, by the way.
I know you're playing the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
But what I'd say is you're not sacrificing your child to your principles if you follow through and send them to the local public school. But if it goes wrong, I understand why you might make the choice to choose otherwise. But to do it simply because you're nervous or people have told you, so many people tell me, oh, the local public, I'd love to send, but the local one's terrible. I go, everyone says that about the local one. Everyone says it. There are people who are busing their kids from the other side of town to the local public school that you're saying is terrible, while you're busing your kid to the other side of town. Because we have this idea that somehow we have to do something special. We've been
Grass is greener.
trained as consumers we have to choose. That's what good parents do. They choose. And in fact, what that does is it drives so much anxiety, because when you make a choice of a school in particular, you're having to choose one. You can't send them to a whole group of schools. You basically have to choose one. That means you have to reject a whole lot of others. How do you know if you made the right choice? And what if it goes wrong? You know, whereas when 40 years ago, when people just sent them to the local public school, those schools were excellent schools. Our international results were up the top. Like, we were doing brilliantly. Now our international results are down the toilet, so it hasn't benefited anyone. And we weren't anxious, and we weren't spending money we could ill afford. So many people are in a hot
Stretched
to the
to the limit.
eyeballs to send these kids to schools that truly aren't actually any better.
Now, what would you say to people who are saying, I'm choosing a school for my children on the basis of the faith that they'll be taught? Either they'll be taught, Catholic faith
Greek
or an Anglican faith or
Orthodox.
Greek Orthodox or an Islamic school
Russian.
or whatever it is.
Well, that's fine. I don't think that choice should be subsidised by the taxpayer. I think that we should have a fantastic gold standard public system available to all, which is funded by all. And if you choose not to access that system, you should pay for the alternative. That's what I think. I think it's simple. It's the way most of the rest of the world does it, and it works very well. But we don't do it that way. Well, okay, you decide to do that. Look, it's entirely up to you. I'm not going to stop you. I might try and argue with you, because the problem is that, well, in Catholic schools, for example, there's not a lot of Catholics left. It's mostly, people tell a lot of lies about attending certain churches and things to get their kids into
That's true.
various religious schools. But even so, dividing our children up according to religious belief is another way of segregating. It's part of this segregation that we're doing. And I mean, I'm all for you, wanting to teach your children the faith you were brought up in, but that's what Sunday school's for, and almost all religions have them. And I think, isn't it healthier for a multicultural, multi-faith society that our children actually get to know one another in classrooms and realise that there is as many ways to live a good life as there are people living lives, and that there's not just one way, and that everybody who's different. I mean, we fund exclusive brethren schools because once you start publicly funding one set of religious schools, well, obviously you have to start funding all of the religious schools. And, are we happy with funding exclusive brethren schools which pretty much actively discourage girls from wanting to go to university? Are we happy with schools that teach creationism? They're not allowed to teach it in science, but they teach creationism, and you think to yourself, do we want our taxpayer dollars going towards creationism? I don't mind if it's a private school. It can teach any damn thing it likes as long as it's privately funded. The only thing private schools have to do in return for their public money, there are only two things they have to do. They have to teach the curriculum. So people who tell me it's a better curriculum in private schools, no, it's the same. And they have to obey the law. That's it. That's all they do in return for their money. Now, the Labor government has said they're fully funding public schools because they've acknowledged that they're underfunded. They're actually not fully funding public schools until 2034.
Whoa.
Which means that a child in kindergarten today in a public school won't get a fully funded education until they're in year 9. So
why does
that's
it
not been
take them that long? That's crazy.
That's nuts.
Because we don't like giving money to poor people. We're against it. I think it's a bad idea. And we have to, and what public schools have to do to get that extra funding is they have to reach certain attendance goals and certain performance hurdles and things like that. So they're always being asked to jump through hoops to get anything extra when they need the extra before they can jump through the hoop, whereas the rich schools get the money without any requirement to justify educationally why they should be getting that funding. What public good does that funding do? And no, it doesn't take the pressure off the public schools. What it does is it increases the pressure on the public schools, because every time you take a middle-class kid out of the public school system, you increase the per-student cost, because poorer, lower socioeconomic, remote and regional, Indigenous, etc., kids with disabilities are more expensive to teach than nice middle-class kids in urban areas. And the private schools have absolutely got that market backed up. And so the public schools are left. And every time a middle class goes, you increase the per student cost in the public school, and they don't get any extra funding. In fact, some people suggest they should get less funding if they leave students. And indeed they do, because it's per student funding. So we actually create a downward spiral in those schools for the kids that are still there. I cannot tell you the damage and the harm that it does. And I think that we are as blind to what we are doing with the way we fund our school system in Australia as Americans are to the damage their lack of gun control is doing in their country. We have the same blindness. We don't want to see it, we refuse to see it, and we can't see it.
What can we do?
That's interesting.
How can we change this?
Well, there are lots of things we could do. I think we should start saying to governments that if schools are getting the same amount of public funding or even more public funding than a similar school down the road, they should have to take some responsibility for the universal education of all students. And they should not be allowed to expel students except according to the same standards that public schools have to abide by if they want to expel a student. Why should they be allowed to take students in and enrol them and get money and funding for them, and then if it goes wrong, just dump them on the public school down the road, which is already dealing with a high degree of difficulty, even though they get more public funding?
Jane, do you think it's a scenario? What I don't understand is why private schools get government funding at all. If they're a
Indeed,
private
they
school.
shouldn't.
I mean, isn't that what the fees are for? Like, if we looked up and it was like Geelong Grammar, I think is Australia's most expensive school, over $52,000 per $1,000 for a day student, and over $88,000 per year for boarders. And I mean, that's a crazy amount of money, but they're getting government funding as well. You know, and that's the thing I don't understand.
I don't understand it either, Janet, but that's what we do.
Yeah.
It's a bit beyond it.
It was really interesting.
That's another thing. That's another thing we could do. We could say, if you are charging fees which are higher than the per student cost of educating a child in a public school, then you should lose your public funding above that amount. You know what I mean? So we basically say pro rata it, and you're getting this much, well, you don't get any public funding. And then that would mean that for those few genuinely low fee schools, I always say low fee to whom and compared to what, but nevertheless, those genuinely low fee schools that do enrol some disadvantaged kids would actually continue to get public funding, but the Geelong Grammars wouldn't. And that, to me, perfectly reasonable.
It makes sense, doesn't it?
Well, I would have thought so, but anyway.
The other interesting thing was, in our Facebook group, She Wasn't Born Yesterday, we have, quite a few teachers spoke to us, and many of them contacted me personally to have a chat about this and for some long conversations. But from their point of view, and really want to thank you guys for contacting us, the consensus seems to be that private schools are usually better resourced and the opportunities for leadership are better, and of course the pay is higher. But on the downside, they said there's often lots more pressure to do more in terms of leadership, and a lot more pressure from parents and a sense of entitlement from some of the students. Would you agree with some of that? And is that a reason why perhaps better teachers are choosing private schools over public
Better
schools?
teachers are not choosing private schools.
That's
There's no
reassuring.
evidence that is true.
That is
However,
good to know.
private schools are publicly funded, and they are using some of that public funding to poach the best teachers from public schools that are struggling with the kids who need them most. And that should be stopped too. That's one of the things we should stop.
Wow.
They should not be able to pay their teachers more than the public school pays their teachers, in my view. That should be an even playing field. The other thing is that the public system, certainly in New South Wales, nobody knows this, the public system in New South Wales public school system is one of the largest in the world, by the way. It enrolls, it goes and seeks out the highest performing education graduates from the major universities and offers them a permanent position in the public education system. This is they're called targeted graduates, and this is highly sought after. So in fact, you could make a case that the best teachers are in the public system, and the new teachers that go into the private system, the ones the Department of Education didn't target. So at least in New South Wales. And also the degree of difficulty that public school teachers face in their classrooms and the kinds of barriers that their students struggle with, if you are managing well in that environment, you are the best teacher in Australia. It's bloody easy to teach a class full of middle-class kids who can be tutored if they've got a problem and whose mum and, entitled parents can be a pain in the ass. And yes, I'm not saying that rich kids don't have mental health issues or, eating disorders and a whole lot of other things. Yes, they do, and that's a challenge. But frankly, it's the cushy end of education. So it's not that they're better teachers. They've got an easier gig. And so, again, it's always rationalisations of why me and my kid should get to have an easier road than her and her kid because they're poor and I'm rich. And I don't think that's what public education is for. And I don't think it's what Australia should be about. And I will keep pointing out the gross inequity, and I won't make you feel fine about it. I won't apologise to you.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I just won't. You've got it all your way as it is. You don't need my good opinion as well.
Are we losing people going into teaching because of the conditions in public schools?
Absolutely. We are losing teachers hand over fist. The churn of teachers in the first 5 years in the profession is huge. The number of ex-teachers you meet gives, credence to that. They have a hugely responsible job. I mean, you'll get young kids straight out of university and they're having to deal with students, for example, who aren't fed, don't have a bed to sleep in. How do they're meant to teach them Hamlet. How does that work exactly? Yeah. The degree of difficulty we place in front of the teachers in those very disadvantaged schools is outrageous. And some of them find a dedication and almost a vocation in that. But a lot of them, it's overwhelming and they get out and they'll often maybe go to a private school, but often they leave altogether, which is a huge loss to us as a community. The understaffing in the public system is huge. There's a whole cohort of schools called difficult to staff, and they're trying to attract teachers with incentives and all that kind of thing. And I think we should go back to the system where the more difficult, the more underfunded, the more disadvantaged the school is, the higher the salary for the teachers.
Absolutely.
And also the smaller the classes they have to teach and the more relief from face-to-face they get. And the wealthier and the cushier and the easier, the less pay they get, the less, because they've got an easier gig anyway.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the teachers spoke to me and she works in a public school but in a very affluent area. And she said there are kids that come to there who don't have lunch. And she said the teachers are constantly buying them food and giving them food and sacrificing their own comfort and money for these kids. And I said, why is that? And she said, because there's so much housing commission around there as well. Right. And, this is the hidden face of what you would perceive as being, a well-off area and a public school in a well-off area. You would assume that everyone's on a level playing field, but in fact they're not.
The average spend in a public school from the teacher's own pocket every year, buying things like food or subsidising excursions or buying things like pens and paper and, that kind of thing, is well over $1,000 a year.
You're kidding.
From each teacher. The thing about the school that's got the housing commission and then the affluent people around it, those schools are often amongst the best schools. It's a bit like some of the rural schools that are in small towns where there's a public school and not a lot of private schools because it's not economically viable. Remember, the private schools, they're not interested in compulsory education. They just want to get the parents who can pay. So there's not a lot of private offerings, if any. Those schools remain comprehensive schools. So they tend to enrol. A few people send their kids to boarding schools, but if you don't want to send your kid away, they enrol the entire community, from the doctor's kids and the real estate agent's kids and the lawyer's kids to the housing commission kids. Those schools tend to do better. Their results are higher.
Okay, right.
Yes, because this kind of mixed cohort seems to enhance everybody's performance, particularly the kids who come from more disadvantaged backgrounds. When we segregate, it seems to depress everyone's performance. Interestingly, even the selective schools, which people never notice, I always think this is hilarious, in a selective school, you will still have 50% of the kids below average.
Because?
Well, you have to have 50% below average in any group. It's mathematically impossible not to.
Yes, of course.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. I failed maths at school.
Yeah, me too.
I went to a public school.
I failed logic as well.
And the kids who were doing really, really well in their mainstream school but have gone to selective but find themselves in the bottom 50% feel bad about themselves. They feel like they're failing. They're not failing. They're still way ahead, but that depresses their performance. So we don't take into account any of that, and we don't think about that. In fact, when you put your kids all in together, it's not that smart kids are better kids than kids who are less academic. It's that the kids who are less academic may have more creativity or subversion or interesting things to say or not as conformist. And we divide. They don't get to see each other. They don't get to know each other. They don't get to meet each other, and they don't get to cross-fertilise.
Is any country doing it well?
Lots of countries are doing it well.
What are they doing that we're not doing?
Well, they put all their kids in together. They don't have public funding of private schools by and large. And if they do, it's not with no strings attached the way Australia does it. There are strings attached. There are responsibilities they have to live up to. For example, New Zealand and the UK, neither of which were particularly outstanding education systems, but I think they're both doing better than us at the moment. Maybe not the UK. They have Catholic schools, but the Catholic schools are part of the public system. They can't charge fees and they can't select who they'll educate. They're allowed to keep this special character, which is the religious education, but that's it. In other countries, they might have small amount of public funding if you've got needy cohorts or whatever. The only country that is we are an outlier. Nobody else funds their education the way we do. No one in the world. No one. We are complete outlier in the way we fund education. However, there is a country that's trying very hard to copy us, really pushing it. It's Trump's America. And Project 2025's chapter on education and what education should be like was basically the system Australia has. Yay us! An inspiration to Trump and MAGA.
We love that for us.
Yeah. It's a marvellous endorsement, isn't it?
Well, you've co-authored a book called The Stupid Country, How Australia is Dismantling Public Education. What inspired you to write that? Was it something to do with what we've just talked about?
Yeah.
Do you have any opinion?
It's trying to wake us up, trying to end the blindness and trying to challenge the self-serving rationalisations of Australia's middle class.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's great because there are so many fantastically successful and inspiring people who have been to public schools and, I reckon should be outer and louder and prouder. Justice Michael Kirby, Kylie Kwong, Russell Crowe, Murray Bashir, who was the ex-Governor-General, John Howard. Scholars, Olympians, business people, researchers have thrived after going to public schools, and they are just such a fantastic example. But I think, I feel like it actually wasn't until we were researching this episode that we discovered this huge discrepancy in the government funding to the schools. I just couldn't believe it. I was just like, surely it should be the other way around. And but I feel like these guys should be, speaking out too and creating this.
We try, but we get very little media coverage because journalists send their kids to private schools, often feel guilty about it and don't want to publicise it. Also because it is complex to explain, and so that makes it not good for clickbait and all that kind of stuff. And it offends the Catholic Church and they get very up in arms about it. And it offends a lot of people who get very angry and push back hard. It's very hard to get anyone to pay attention to this huge discrepancy. Governments, media, business doesn't want to shine a light on it. So there's a few of us, lonely voices, screaming out in the wilderness and going, this is absolute insanity. And it makes our education system much more expensive than it should be. We have enough money to help the needy kids in our society to make up for the gap that's visited upon them at birth. We have enough money, but we're too busy giving it to Geelong Grammar to spend it on them.
It's a very emotive issue, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? Because
very emotive.
It's sort of like the old school, what school did you go to, and all of that. It's that.
It's an oligarchy. We are ruled by a private school educated oligarchy. Almost all our parliamentarians either went to private schools or send their own children to them. So it's become the ruling class. And generally the ruling class don't like to change the fact that they're the ruling class. They want to stay that way. I'm out to knock them off their pedestal, but I think I'll probably die before that happens.
Well, we hope that doesn't happen, gorgeous.
Can I just say, because I've just written a long-form essay for the Australia Institute that have brought out a new sort of publication called Vantage Point, where they're looking at issues in Australian society. The latest one is about higher education. George Williams has written that. And mine will be called Poor Kid, Rich Kid, The Battle for Public Education. And that will be out in April if people are interested to read.
Fabulous. Thank you. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And personally for you, gorgeous, is there another book in the works for you, another novel?
Yes, I'm writing a novel at the moment as well.
Oh, my goodness.
Not about public or private schools.
Something like murders or anything like that? Or
Yes, it's crime. It's a murder mystery.
Excellent. Can you give us a hint? No.
Squeeze that in amongst everything
No
else.
hints at the moment.
No
No,
hints.
no,
Okay.
buy it.
So would you actually be the spokesperson in Australia for public education at the moment?
Oh, there are a few of us. The union's very good, and there are, Michael Kirby's very good. And actually, Sam Austin, the Governor-General, is a great supporter of public education. She's a product of public education.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister, I heard him give a speech on Public Education Day a couple of years ago, and he's the only Prime Minister I've ever heard do this, who spoke. He went to a Catholic school himself, but he spoke about how he and his former wife, Carmel, who had been the Education Minister in New South Wales in the state government, sent their son Nathan to public schools from kindergarten to year 12, and what a brilliant education he had had in public schools. Jodie Hayden, his now wife, is a great supporter of public education as well. So, yes, there are people in high places, but it's an unpopular topic. It ruffles a lot of feathers. It ruffles the powerful's feathers the most, and it creates a lot of uncomfortable feelings in people. And so they'd rather it wasn't spoken about. I'm not terribly bothered about uncomfortable feelings in those who are privileged. I reckon you can suck it up.
And on that happy note,
Pay to get therapy.
That's right.
And, if you can't take a challenge, then that's just silly.
And if you can't argue back,
Yeah. I mean, you can give your argument to me.
yes,
It's better be armed with the facts.
yes, that's right, exactly. If you don't have an argument, if your argument is just emotive,
Then you will attack me.
That-
That's what I
yes,
find.
right.
If you don't
Yeah.
have an argument, I will be told that I'm envious, that I'm jealous, that I'm... And I say,
Right.
why would I envy you? Why? That's so self-aggrandising that somehow, because you sent your child to that school, you're enviable? Are you sure? Is that your only claim to fame? Really? I don't envy you. I
Yes.
certainly don't envy you the having to pay the school fees.
Yes,
pretty outrageous.
I never had to do that. And my kids went to uni and they're gainfully employed. And
Yeah,
Yeah.
but not
I'm fine.
in those former roles that you were talking about, prostitution and
not in those former
Not in
roles.
those.
No, I tried hard, but I failed.
unfortunate.
good to know.
Thank you so much for chatting with us today on She Wasn't Born Yesterday. We've really gone to school on a lot of those ideas, and we hope the conversation keeps going. Yes,
Thank you
much.
so much. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for your company. What did you think of this episode?
Well, tell us everything, Gorgi, with a cheeky review on Apple Pods. We'd love to know what you reckon about our topics and our guests. And us.
And we look forward to your company next time on She Wasn't Born Yesterday.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.